coming up. NHL season's back. I could be the first one to tell you I'm ecstatic. I finally have something to talk about on the show. I feel like the past 3 weeks it's been kind of I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but we have some huge games tonight. We have the Islanders and the Rangers, and the new improved Islanders are really starting their season off strong, going 2-0. The Rangers have really yet to impress so far, except for the first game against St. Louis. We'll talk about that matchup. We have a bunch of other topics to talk about regarding the AHL, what happened to Gillies and getting suspended for 12 games, a lot of other news around the NHL. But I just want to start off with an interesting note. There's a picture going viral from the Florida Panthers I'm pretty sure season opener, and there were combined 7,000 fans for the season opener. Just to give you an aspect of how awful that is, the Buffalo Sabres had a black and white scrimmage a few weeks ago before the season started. I think even before the preseason started, and they drew 10,000 fans. So I pose this question. You look at the low and poor attendance. Even the ratings are awful there. No one wants to watch them. What are we going to do with the Florida Panthers? Is this going to be a situation where we've talked about this before? There are a couple of cities who are looking for NHL teams, preferably Las Vegas, Quebec City, Seattle. These are all new teams that are all cities that are looking for a new team and probably can support a fan base there. And no disrespect to the Panthers, somewhat of a good franchise, but kind of looks like a similar situation to what happened to the Thrashers a few years ago. You see the Thrashers in 10 years, 12-year history, they've only made the playoffs once. And you look at the Panthers, except for the Cup run in '96, where they got swept by the Avalanche. What other significant event has happened that kind of is a glimmer of hope for the Panthers? Unfortunately, there really is none, and there's really none for the fans. I mean, 2 years ago, you look how they had that playoff run against the New Jersey Devils. They were a third seed. They won the Southeast Division. All awesome news. But if you can't put the success on paper to success in the postseason, then really how successful are you? So it's interesting to see. Would I like to see the Panthers stay around? Absolutely. They have Aaron Ekblad, Jonathan Huberdeau, Barkov, all these really good upcoming and new stars that could really make them successful and bring popularity to Sunrise, Florida. And it's not like pretty much every city in Florida is in hockey crazy. Look at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay almost sells out all of their games. They sell out most of their games. So it's not like Florida can't produce good hockey and that they can't draw fans. I'm sure winning a Stanley Cup in 2004 also adds a little bit of help to drawing a fan base. But I'm sure everyone in the NHL wants to see the Panthers be successful, similar to an Arizona Coyotes situation. The past 7 or 10 years they've been struggling with ownership problems. Their location of their arena in Glendale isn't the most desired location. The fans have trouble. If you live in Arizona, you try to go to Glendale. It's kind of a hike. So that's why they struggle a decent amount with their attendance records. But if you look at playoffs and even regular games, they can make noise. So it's not so much the passion, because I'm sure there are Florida Panthers fans who are, I'm sure, more passionate than Canadiens fans. You can say some are. When a team's around that long, I'm sure they're going to develop some type of small fan base, not big, but small enough. But who's to know what will come about in the next 3 years for the Florida Panthers. Honestly, I cannot. I don't see them staying in the NHL much longer. If they continue with the poor attendance and they're struggling endeavor to try to keep fans interested in the franchise. So I just found that very interesting, unfortunately. Also, shout out to my friend Dan Shaver on the Hofstra College, Hofstra University roller hockey team, scoring 5 points. So Dan, there's your shout out. You got it. Not really sure how much of a hockey player that makes you, but I'll give you a shout out anyway. Back to the show. So I found this also very surprising. The first 3 or so games, the Tampa Bay Lightning have impressed me a lot. Victor Hedman has 7 points in 3 games. Steven Stamkos got out to a very fast start last night. He scored a hat trick against Montreal. He looks like he's about to go on fire. And Brock Nelson of the Islanders, 6 points in 2 games. And I could see, I've talked about this before, the Islanders are an upcoming force in the NHL. They're really going to make a lot of noise in the 2014-2015 season. Do I think they might make the playoffs? I think they have an opportunity to. But I would not overreact, especially if, you're 2-0, which is awesome. But you're playing, both of those games are against a very weak team in the Carolina Hurricanes, ranked in like the bottom 5 of all the play in the NHL. So it's kind of interesting to see how they'll go up against the New York Rangers tonight, where you're not facing Cam Warden, that you're facing Henrik Lundqvist, who's a perennial Vezina candidate. So I'm very interested to see what will happen, and I'm sure tonight will be a fantastic game. I will get to that. And I was actually reading an article the other day. If any of you are aware, usually what happens is the AHL, the American Hockey League, which is the minor league affiliate of the NHL, what they usually do is they implement rules that almost, it seems like the NHL would be interested to see how the rules work out in a professional level of play. So the AHL is adding a 7-minute overtime where the first 3 minutes of play are 4-on-4. That's usually how it goes, 4-on-4 overtime. And then the next 4 minutes, so 3 minutes 4-on-4, and then the next 4 minutes are played 3-on-3. And I'm not sure how I feel about this. Depending on how successful it is in the AHL, if it is successful and it adds excitement, then I'm sure the NHL will have no problem picking it up and being interested in using it. But listen to this. If you have the 4-on-4 and then you add the 3-on-3 play for 4 minutes, it makes it interesting how the future of the shootout will be determined. I mean, 3-on-3, you have a lot of open ice to do really whatever you want. And if you look at this, you have 1 forward and 2 defensemen. You have 2 forwards and 1 defenseman. You can go 1 forward against 2 defensemen. The other team has 2 forwards and 1 defenseman. There's uneven matches on both teams, but there's also an even advantage. But if there's that much open ice and you score more than enough, 7 minutes of wide open ice where a lot of these players are, and most all of them are in very, very good shape and can move around the ice very quickly, is like I just can't see the shootout being as much as I love the shootout, I can't see it being as prevalent and happening as often as it would. See, the shootout, I think, was one of the attempts after the lockout from Gary Bettman and a lot of the owners in the NHL to help bring back some type of excitement towards hockey. A lot of back in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was a very choppy game. There was a lot of hitting. Look at the Devil's Trap system that really killed a lot of excitement for the game. There weren't as many goals. So, the implement of the trapezoid and then you put in the shootout kind of gave a reasons for fans to be excited and for the NHL to showcase some of the skill that some of their NHL players have. So it's interesting to see what will happen. And then there's another one in the AHL, the Adirondack Flames, right? The Adirondack Flames. If you remember this, Trevor Gillies of the New York Islanders played there for a few years. He was more of a goon, if anyone. Suspended 12 games for getting in an altercation with an opposing player. And pretty much the opposing player wasn't able to drop his gloves. So Gillies starts, beating on him, hitting him in the head, just wailing on him. The guy falls on the ice, and Gillies picks him up and slams his head on the ice. So that's a 12-game suspension in the AHL. And, good riddance. There's no place in the NHL for this garbage, for any of this garbage. Trevor Gillies, without a doubt, has no class whatsoever. He doesn't belong in the sport of hockey. He doesn't belong on an ice rink if he's doing that. Especially Trevor Gillies, mid-30s goon, some chump is beating up on players who are looking to develop and bring their skills to the NHL. There's no room for that. And I'm happy to see him get the 12-game suspension. I'd suspend him for the whole season if it was up to that. And you look at the NHL now, and they're phasing out more of these enforcer roles from their rosters. It seems that the NHL is almost making maybe more of a switch to play where there's more style and creativity and there's more speed to the game rather than 10 years ago where there was a lot of hitting and it was more physical, more physical than it is now. So when you take out a lot of those, NHL enforcers and you push them down into the AHL, ECHL roles, now all those enforcers are now in the minor leagues. So now that's why there's so much prevalency of suspensions and fights. And don't get me wrong at all. I think fighting belongs in the game. I think it's what makes hockey so special. And I think without fighting in the game, hockey loses that prestige, that oomph that it has. Now, am I saying that I like all-out brawls? And do I like concussions? Absolutely not. I think cheap hits and elbows, elbows to the head, end careers, and they just have no positive no positive look on the game at all. I'm just interested to see how the AHL will handle this. You see Trevor Gillies. What if he does it again? What's going to happen? I can tell you, I don't think Trevor Gillies is going to make the NHL again. Even when you looked at him in the Islanders, he was kind of, he was more of a fighting role than anyone. I think you do need that enforcer on your team. That if they're kind of picking on the first line, if they're beating up on one player, then you know what it is. It's good to show them, somewhat of a lesson sometimes. Don't mess with our number one players, or our tough guy, our bad guy is gonna, get you back. But it's just upsetting to see, that the game has taken this approach, where a lot of these enforcers really don't have a lot of jobs left, and they're trying to keep their jobs and have an impact on the ice, and hopefully, it remains positive, but this is a negative impact. Nobody wants to see this at all. So who's to know in the next 10 years if, the NHL gets rid of fighting. And you looked at. I actually did a article on exposed hockey. I actually promoted last week, exposedhockey.com. It's it's a good hockey website. A couple weeks ago about the prevalency of fighting and if it does belong in the NHL. And I do believe it does. But looking at a lot of these documentaries, George LaRock, a very, very successful NHL enforcer, actually does not condone fighting. He does not like it at all. And he actually wrote a book discussing that, back when he was a young kid in Quebec. Unfortunately, or not fortunately, but George LaRock is a Haitian Canadian. So he actually, faced a lot of discrimination playing hockey when he was younger. So he actually learned how to fight. He said he was the best scorer on his team, but he had to learn to fight in order to defend himself. And he continued to do that through the NHL. And, people were loving him, and he felt guilty about that because they weren't loving him for the hockey player he was. They didn't love him for the skill. They loved him because he fought. And that scared George LaRock in many ways. And he discussed, different topics about substance abuse, how a lot of these fighters would have concussion problems due to the fact that they were constantly taking hits to the head. So they'd pop pills, do anything to keep them on their game. And there's it's just it's a very powerful book to read. A lot of different articles on it too. But I found it very interesting. I gained a lot of respect for George LaRock. I always loved him as a player. I think even though he fought, he played the game the right way. He always brought 100% effort. But it was a new side to see the NHL. Really opens up your eyes to how serious fighting can be in the NHL. But it's very, very it's interesting to see how that can turn out.